Welcome to a special edition of the No Dunks podcast. I'm Lee Ellis. I'm joined by Tass Mellis and the man making the magic happen, JD. Today, we're going down under, that's right, to talk to NBL broadcaster and writer Liam Santamaria. Why? Because we want to find out just how good LaMelo Ball might be in the NBA, and nobody is better qualified to tell us that than Liam. Liam spent last season watching and covering LaMelo play for the Illawarra Hawks in Australia's National Basketball League, and he joins us on the show today. Liam, welcome to the No Dunks podcast.
Thanks, Lee. Good to be with you guys. Tass, I tell you, I go way back with you fellas, back to the TBJ days at the Score, and so great to be with you.
Thanks a lot for coming on, man. I appreciate it. I'm glad Lee had to be the one to say Illawarra Hawks as well, because I had no idea how to say that name, but now I'm good.
Hey, Liam, I'm going to have to really enjoy this podcast because finally it's going to be two Australian guys outnumbering the North American guys. So we can make fun of Tass's accent as much as we like on this show, okay? I've got like 8 or 9 years built up here. So anything that Tass says that sounds funny, let him hear it about it, okay?
You got some pent-up frustration you want to get out of that? I'll help you with that.
Nice one. Okay, well, let's get into it because it's obviously a big story and there's a lot of hype around LaMelo Ball. So, when did you first hear that he was coming to Australia and what did you know about him?
The first word I got, there was some sort of suggestion that he might. We've obviously got the Next Stars program here in the NBL, which is kind of pretty well known about, recruiting young, talented prospects on their way to the NBA and trying to find a good way to make that happen. So there was, he was a pretty obvious target for that program. So we discussed it a little bit over here on air about what that would like, whether we thought he would be a good fit. And then the first read I got that it was maybe a real deal was when the owner of the Illawarra Hawks slid into my DMs and said, "What's your read on LaMelo Ball? What do you think of him? Tell me." So look, I gave him a pretty honest appraisal of the pros and the cons. I immediately knew what was going on, right? That there was the potential that he might come to that team. And, I told him the pros and cons of what he was like as a player and what him coming to the Hawks would bring to that club and to the NBL. And then obviously left it to the club and the league to make that decision. And they dove in. So from there, it was obviously big news, massive profile of a kid, and brought a lot of attention to our league.
What were the pros and cons that you sent back?
Well, obviously, I kind of mapped out his skill set, right? So, you're not going to bring a kid like LaMelo Ball over to sit on the bench. So he's going to come out here and play a whole bunch of minutes. You're probably going to have conversations that are going to involve a starting role and what's that going to mean for your team. So I mapped out that he's, an elite playmaker, has incredible vision, but there's massive question marks over elements of his game, right? What's he going to be like as a defender? What's his shot selection going to be like at the pro level? Can he run a team? Is he serious about becoming a pro and becoming a great player? We knew him as a high schooler putting up 92 points and cherry picking and from his reality TV show. But this is a legit league, and this is one of our most historic clubs with a proud history. If you're going to be bringing him in, you need to know all the pros and the cons, and they were the big question marks over him coming in.
It is a big team, of course, in the NBL, but it's not Sydney and it's not Melbourne. It's not Perth, which Perth is probably, one of the bigger teams as well. Historically, they're very, very successful. Once the sort of word got out that LaMelo might be coming, did these other teams think, well, hang on a minute, Illawarra's, relatively speaking, not a big city compared to Sydney or Melbourne. He should be playing for the Kings or Melbourne United or something like that. Was there any sort of like race to try to get his signature?
I think there was a bit of that feeling, Lee, from some of the fans, for sure, saying, well, why would we bring him over and waste him in a small market team? I think more so from within those organizations, they're all kind of teams with big-time championship aspirations. So the idea of bringing in a teenager to run their team probably wasn't really necessarily on the radar of those types of teams, Melbourne have Mello Trimble, who you'd know from Maryland, ready to go at the point guard position. Sydney had Casper Ware, former Philadelphia 76ers guy. And the Wildcats, of course, Bryce Cotton and Damian Martin-Lee, who you'd know well, 6-time Defensive Player of the Year. So I think a lot of those teams were probably not really interested in having LaMelo come in. So a smaller market team like Illawarra sort of suited.
What about, obviously, the big cloud that hangs over any of the Ball boys is LaVar, and LaVar doesn't want his, like you said earlier, that he doesn't want LaMelo going out there sitting on the bench, in a men's league, just playing garbage time. This was about trying to get LaMelo exposure and trying to get his profile up to the point where he is a high lottery draft pick in the NBA. What sort of influence and impact do you think LaVar had on the role that LaMelo was expected to play there for the Hawks?
Not a heap, I would say, Lee. I mean, it came out pretty quickly after it was locked in that he was going to come down, that LaVar really wasn't going to be involved all that much. The word was Jermaine Jackson, former NBA player, LaMelo's mentor, who coached him at Spire, was going to be that guy. And that really, the word came out from the beginning was that LaVar's not going to be here. He's not going to be here in any way, shape, or form. Now, eventually he did come down for a little bit to shoot some of the show, but the word came out pretty quick. Like, actually, yes, there's an element of trying to get some exposure. People need to see him out on the floor, but in actual fact, it became clear he was coming down here to get better, predominantly, and that they didn't really want the traveling roadshow of LaVar to come in and create headlines. They wanted a situation where he could focus, work on his game, not create waves within the team, and try to put his best foot forward.
So he played with his brother LiAngelo in Lithuania prior to coming to Australia. Do you think that helped both the Hawks make the decision, and from LaMelo's perspective, that he just kind of grew up having a bit of an experience internationally before coming over?
Yeah, I think so. I think on the ground, once it got here, it certainly seemed like that had helped him. One of the things, sort of start to step onto what he was like on the floor. One of the things that really stood out to me was his poise. Now, he's obviously super confident. His confidence just oozes out of him. But his poise in a pro league against men, guys much older, stronger than him, was really obvious. And I think you'd have to say his experience over in Lithuania, and part of it was probably learning some of what to do, but also some of what not to do. Learning, and I think one of the things he probably learned from that experience was, I need to assimilate myself into the group, into my team, get to know my coach, get to know my teammates. And I think the fact that we speak English over here probably helped that a lot. And I think that helped him on the floor as well, because he kind of became pretty friendly with a bunch of guys on that team, and created a pretty good feeling within that group.
When Lonzo made his debut for the Lakers against the Clippers, Patrick Beverley made a note of, like, I'm getting in this guy's face. I'm going to hit him. I'm going to whack him. And he did. He basically, as soon as Lonzo stepped on the court, Patrick Beverley tried to send a message to him that he's playing with the men. It's a men's league and there's no favors here. Was there an element of that with LaMelo when he started playing? Because it's obviously not the NBA, but he brings that hype and he brings that attention, and he's a bit of a glamour boy as well. Like, were some of the veterans in the NBL trying to send a similar message to him?
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that, Lee. In fact, we saw some of it right off the bat. Our preseason tournament here in the NBL is called the Blitz. That thing was held in Tasmania, right at the bottom of the country last year. And his first game was against the Perth Wildcats, the two-time defending champs, match up with Damian Martin, a legend of our league, as I said, 6-time Defensive Player of the Year, a world-class defender. And it was a preseason game for Damian Martin. It was a big game for LaMelo, because that place was swarming with scouts and NBA scouts. A lot of it had made their way over to watch LaMelo and also watch RJ Hampton. And he really stood up in that game. Damo got all up in him, tried to speed him up, tried to get physical with him. And that was that was the game that, I mean, he had 19, 13, and 7 in an overtime win in that game. That was preseason, of course, but it showed that that approach wasn't necessarily going to work. He didn't buy in to any of the physicality. It didn't really speed him up and force him into, a whole bunch of turnovers or anything like that. And as a result, I think over the course of the season, we didn't see a lot of that with LaMelo. We saw a bit of it with RJ Hampton, who's obviously the other guy on the board who was here with the Breakers. There was a game midway through the season against against Southeast Melbourne Phoenix where some guys got into him. Ben Madgen, a seasoned veteran here, got into RJ. He responded, went a little over the top, and got ejected. And it was a bit of a window into the difference between the personality of those two guys. RJ was a little bit more like, I need to make a statement that you can't do that to me. Whereas LaMelo, it was more like water off a duck's back. He just ignored it and let his game do the talking.
Liam, 2 questions for you. Lee mentioned you should be making fun of my accent. My question is, do all Australians say the word debut instead of debut? Is that how it works?
Is that what I said?
No, that's what Lee said. Lee always says debut when he was talking about Lonzo Ball. Is it debut?
I think Lee's got a little bit of a hybrid thing going on a little bit these days. So some of those names, I think, some of those words fall kind of halfway between what we'd say and what you've influenced him to say.
So you say
we'd say debut.
Oh, okay, because we've heard it forever.
Maybe I'm just it's from the Richie Beno era. I'm just still, he's on debut, so. So you said there, Liam, LaMelo let his game do the talking. So tell us about his game. Tell us about what you saw up close. He played 12 games, I think. Is that right? For the Hawks there. So not a huge sample size, but enough to sort of gain some idea of what talents he has and what he can work on, of course. I mean, all young guys coming into the league are never the finished product. But what did you like about his game? What did you see about his game? What's his strength? What's the sort of thing that people can expect that he will bring to the NBA, certainly in his first season or two?
His playmaking, Lee, is his number one primary elite skill. I mean, his playmaking, his vision, his passing ability, those things are elite, not just for his age, but for anyone, period. So that's the thing that jumps off as soon as you watch him. And that's the thing that NBA scouts have fallen in love with, because there's shades of, and obviously we throw these names out cautiously, but there's shades of Magic Johnson and Jason Kidd when you watch him in the open floor, because he has that kind of size at the point guard position. He has that kind of feel, vision, loves setting up his teammates. And in the open floor, terrific at finding players getting to the rim. But then in the half court, can look over the defense, find guys rolling to the rim, can get into the lane and can twist and contort his body to finish, but also on kickouts, to find guys at awkward angles. His vision is elite. So that's the thing that people have fallen in love with. And we saw in a big way here, he averaged 7 assists a game. Pretty impressive assist to turnover ratio here for a young kid handling the rock so much. And then there's the question marks, though, of course, which are still big question marks. His shooting has showed the ability to get hot. Had some games where he hit 4 of 6 or 5 of 7 threes, but he had a lot of those games where he hit 1 of 11, but he just kept firing away. That confidence I spoke of. Shot 24% from 3 here, which is that's the expression we all that gives you. So I mean that's a big question. And then defensively, he improved, but that's still a massive weakness for him. I mean, when he came over here, it looked like he'd never been taught how to play defense at all. Had no concept of how to, the importance of doing the little things defensively, staying in front of your man, helping your teammates, being on a string. Those kind of defensive concepts are pretty foreign to him. So you talk about him not being a finished product. I think it's in that sense that is probably the biggest way. Just really has a long way to go defensively.
But you said he bought in, right? And he was part of the program and part of the team. Do you have a sense that his team enjoyed having him around and being a part of the squad?
I did, for sure. Especially the young guys. The Hawks were an interesting team last year. Their whole roster, they probably only had one guy, Todd Blanchfield, who was in his prime. The rest of them were sort of very, very early in their career as pros, or guys at the very end, Dave Anderson, Josh Boone, these types of guys.
Oh, yeah. There's an NBA name, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, Dave Anderson was a Raptor too, briefly.
Yeah. Little Rocket. Yeah.
Yeah. So those types of guys, AJ Ogilvy, you might remember him from Vanderbilt. So a bunch of guys at the end of their career, a bunch of guys at the start. I think the younger guys really got on with him well, spent a lot of time with him off the floor, and we're excited to be a part of a guy that was on his way to being a top NBA draft pick in many ways. And I think the older guys, a lot of those guys are at a point in their career where they're looking to wrap their arms around younger players and kind of give back and be a bit of a mentor. So in that respect, I think that it worked out pretty well for him to be on a team like that. It wasn't a bunch of guys in their prime saying, this is the time for me to be putting up massive numbers. I need the rock. It was a kind of a more favorable situation for him. And I think that was one of the big things that came out of that team. He did buy in. The coaches loved having him there. He worked hard. He was very coachable. And, for a teenager dominating the ball and at times, to be honest, stat chasing, it was pretty impressive that there were, no major kind of issues within that team.
Yeah, well, he had 2 triple-doubles, I believe. But from what you're describing there, it sounds like, he was down there to work hard and to try to be more than just a guy to be like, I don't care. I mean, the team didn't do well. They didn't win a lot of games. In fact, I think they finished last, and he only won a couple of games himself. But it sounds from what you're saying here, though, that his work ethic is pretty strong. And he understands what his strengths are, but he also understands he's got to work on those weaknesses. So, I mean, from what you know of the NBA, I mean, how quickly do you think he can have an impact? And if you were to draft him, I mean, are you expecting this guy to come out and be a starter in his first season and to be, maybe even a point guard I mean, he's expected to go high in the draft. Do you think he's ready for something like that? Or is he still, he's still a year or so away from taking on a role that big for an NBA team?
I think there's probably kind of 2 parts to that answer. There's what he could do, what he'd be ready to come out and do on a particular team, and then what would be best for him.
Right.
I mean, if a smaller, if a team like Charlotte or Minnesota, one of those teams picks him up, could he come out and be their starting point guard and they could start that process? Sure. I mean, and I spoke about his confidence before. I mean, his confidence is unshakable. And ours is a good league here. I mean, it's one of the top pro leagues in the world, and we've got elite talent here. And he kind of it didn't shake him at all. I mean, you could pick him up, I think, and put him in one of these playoff games happening today, and he would feel like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
It wouldn't shake his confidence one little bit. He'd go out and do his thing, spread, pick and roll, have some fun. He's going to give up points down the other end. He's going to take some shots that are ill-advised, but he's going to also make a whole bunch of plays. Having said that, if a team like Golden State, for example, keeps that pick and takes him, I mean, I think that would be, for him and his development, that would be the perfect landing spot.
Right.
Because, you can imagine a guy like Draymond Green, there's going to be accountability for him at the defensive end. They're going to teach him how to play defense. Draymond Green says, Andrew Bogut taught me how to play defense. I think that, you could have the potential years down the track of LaMelo Ball saying the same kind of thing about Draymond Green. Right. They're not going to stand for him just reaching and getting burnt or ball watching off the ball. and then you could bring him off the bench. He could play a kind of a Sean Livingston type of role for that team. I think long term that would be the best thing for his development. But on a and less of a championship aspiring team, he could definitely come out and have an impact in year one.
Yeah, I don't know, obviously, certainly as much as you. I've seen highlights, and he looks like he's got the talent, but I think for a young guy, for sure, it would be better for him to be basically just a bench guy for his first season and playing behind Steph and, in that Golden State system. It would be tough. He wouldn't like it for the first year or two, but in 3 or 4 years' time, when he's had that experience and his body's filled out a bit and he's seen how those guys work, I think he'd be a better player in the long run rather than being thrown into the fire in a team that's kind of like, let's say he goes to Minnesota. I mean, they got D'Angelo Russell anyway, but the expectations are like, we haven't won, we need to win, whereas the Warriors have got a little bit more time there. The one thing I want to ask you about as well is, you mentioned there was a ton of scouts out in Australia when he first went there. How long did they stay? Were they there for the entire run, or they just sort of coming in and out every now and again? And have any of them or any teams reached out to you and sort of said, hey, tell us what you think about LaMelo and what you saw in him?
Well, they mainly come and went. There was, a couple of teams that had a presence here for the entire season, but most of them picked their spots. So I mentioned them coming to Tasmania at the Blitz. They did that because in a short space of time, they'd see a couple of games of both LaMelo and RJ Hampton. So they're like, okay, that's the right spot to come and see. They've picked some other spots in the schedule where they'd be able to see both LaMelo and RJ. And then some just came and went and really just wanted to see LaMelo. Right. You spoke about one of his triple-doubles, Lee. He had a 30-point triple-double in an overtime win in his second last game with Mitch Kupchak sitting right there in front row, courtside.
Wow.
That kind of jumped off the page to me as well, as that was a big moment. The Charlotte were obviously going to have a pretty high pick in the draft, and Mitch Kupchak, you can't miss him. You know who he is. Jermaine Jackson would have let LaMelo know he's sitting right there courtside, and he came out and really, that was his best game. He balled out, had an influence on winning, and played really well. So that was kind of the way the scouts approached it. And to be honest, I've had a couple of calls, but not as many as I would have thought. I mean, I actually had more last year for Brian Bowen,
right?
Who was in the Next Stars program with the Pacers and was coming into the draft, and a couple of years before that with Terrence Ferguson, who's now with OKC and spent a year here on the way. So I think maybe the fact that they had a bigger presence here and they saw things with their own eyes, and they watched a lot of games live from back home probably means they don't need to get that extra opinion.
Yeah, so I find that interesting. You mentioned Jermaine Jackson was his manager, for lack of a better term, and former NBA player. He got around a little bit in the NBA. It's interesting that he traveled with him. Obviously, LaVar didn't make his way down there until he had to film his show, as you said. You said the preseason tournament in Tasmania was enormous. Was had a bunch of people at it. Have you ever seen it that busy? Has the preseason tournament ever been that much of a spectacle?
No. I mean, it took it to another level with all those guys in attendance. So, I mean, it was interesting. They weren't the big names. They weren't, it weren't a lot of the GMs or the assistant GMs. It was more of the kind of the scouts that had been sent down at that point. But it was that game really where he took his big leap on draft boards. Jonathan Gavoni from ESPN and Draft Express was in the building, watched that game against the Perth Wildcats that I spoke about. And it was after that one where he went from, I'm going to say maybe 30, 32 on the ESPN mock draft to 2.
That 30-point triple-double that game.
No. He's almost triple-double in the preseason.
Oh, okay.
19, 13, and 7. Okay. His 30-point triple-double was his second last game.
Yeah.
And so that was when he took a big leap. And that was when a lot of those scouts went back clearly and said, he's legit. We need to invest some more time in him. And from there, we started to see more and more of the kind of bigger names come down and check him out. I mentioned Mitch Kupchak. There was a game earlier in the season where it was RJ Hampton and LaMelo Ball's first time against each other at the pro level in New Zealand. And a bunch of people made sure that they were there. Trajan Langdon from the Pelicans, guys like that sitting front row to watch them go to work. So it was the preseason tournament in 2016 when Terrence Ferguson came across, was when it went up another level in terms of the presence of scouts, but last year was on a whole nother echelon.
Yeah, so do you see this happening more and more and more? You said Ferguson, RJ Hampton, obviously Ball. Will guys continue to come down to Australia with the program that you talked about off the top there?
I think so. It's a bit of a moving beast at the moment because the NBA and the G League have adjusted. They've put in that new program, and as a result, I think a lot of the guys that have signed on to that team, the NBL had their sights on bringing them down and kind of continuing the momentum. But Jalen Green and Kuminga, these types of guys, they were hoping to get them in the mix. But so there's been a bit of a shift in the landscape with that G League program, and now the NBL is kind of looking at different ways to make sure that they can continue to bring in talent. The program opened itself up last year to also bring in draft and stash guys as part of the mix. So we saw Didi Luzada from the Pelicans here. And I think there's a chance that, we might see more and more of those guys. And also, I think we're going to see some guys that have already started playing college, but are going to jump ship and come down here for a year before they go into the draft. And, with the uncertainty of what the NCAA is going to look like this year and what they've seen with LaMelo Ball and RJ Hampton, I think we're going to see some more of those guys. But I think right now the G League has made that power play to pull those top guys off the board.
So how well do you know the other guys who are expected to be the high lottery picks, Anthony Edwards, James Wiseman, Killian Hayes? I don't know if you know those guys too well or their game, but if you were to say right now, where do you think LaMelo is going to get picked? I mean, you said Golden State, and they got the number 2 pick, so that would be a good spot for him. But if you were to say right now, based on what you saw and what you know about those other guys, where is LaMelo being drafted?
I think he's going to go top 3. That's probably as far as I'll go in terms of locking in. That seems to be the consensus. With Edwards and with Wiseman. I mean, I think he's definitely, for me, he's in that mix. And then it's about whether who wants to take that plunge. I mean, he's a high risk pick, but with that risk comes potentially great reward. And we've seen these types of guys over previous years. I mean, Giannis is a perfect example of that, right? I mean, everyone saw him as a high risk pick, and a whole bunch of teams didn't want to take that risk. The Bucks did, and they've reaped the rewards. And then we've got there's a whole bunch of other examples of teams taking those high risk guys
that didn't work.
Potentially really high ceiling, but potentially a really low floor, and it not working out so well. So I would be, if I had to kind of look in my crystal ball, I could see him going number 2, but not to Golden State.
Right.
That's trade down right. Which
that wouldn't shock me. And honestly, if I was, I love all the strengths in his game, but if I was them, that's what I would do. I mean, you're probably going to have, there's going to be maybe the Knicks are this team who love him more than you do and want him more than you do, and are willing to put something on the table that makes that worthwhile.
Yeah, it's easy. Even I just watched highlights as Lee did it. I don't know why. I didn't think he was 6'7", because he seems like he's a legit 6'7". Just didn't seem that tall. But as you said, you threw out the names, the big names, the Magics and the J Kids, because he really has that physical attribute, right? Was there anything else about him physically that was either a positive or negative?
I thought he was going to get pushed around a little bit more than he did. He's obviously got a lot of room to grow in terms of his physique and his strength, but he has an ability offensively to kind of use your physicality against you. Like a lot of the times he looked like he wanted guys to crawl in. He wanted Damian Martin to get into his stuff. He would have invited that Pat Beverly type of approach that you were talking about earlier, Lee, because he thinks that makes it easier for me to get by you, because his first couple of steps are so quick. So, he was pretty comfortable with contact at the rim. Didn't have a massive free throw rate, but was certainly not afraid to go in there and attack the rim and get downhill. Defensively, though, was a bit more of an issue. I mean, he did get moved around a little bit. At 6'7", with that length, he has the physical tools to be a really good defender. And, you think about that Golden State system, how much they switch. I mean, you have a 6'7" point guard who's to slide into that system, that would work pretty well. He has great switchability in that regard, but needs to get a lot stronger to be able to make that work, to be able to switch on to 3s and 4s and 5s. And, he wouldn't be able to hold those guys out of the paint right now. So his height and his length were, really helpful for him at the offensive end, but he hasn't learned how to use them defensively just yet.
And just to be clear, he played 12 games, as you said. At the preseason tournament, ended it with that second last game, that monster 30-point triple-double. And to be clear, he got injured at the end of it, right? And that's why his season finished, because there also was this really weird story about a horse, about him owning a horse named LaMelo. But I don't know, it was also tied into him being injured. So he finished because he got banged up. Is that right?
Well, that horse is about to have its maiden run.
Excuse me?
This weekend. You need to put some hard-earned on LaMelo. So we're all keen to see how that thing goes. He had, in his 11th and 12th games, Tass, he had triple-doubles. Okay. The 30-point triple-double against Cairns, and then he went over to New Zealand and had another triple-double in a losing game. Poor field goal percentage, 1 from 11 from 3. They lost, but another triple-double. First guy in NBL history in our 40-minute era. Our league used to be 48 minutes, and it's had some stretches where it's 40 minutes. He's the only guy in our league's history to have back-to-back triple-doubles in 40-minute games. And that was it. At that point, he was done.
Right.
So my understanding is, he had a bit of a bone bruise in the foot, and, you can kind of fill in the rest. I mean, he'd put enough on display for people to recognize what he could do at the pro level. Is a combination of the fact of, well, it's time to shut it down in that regard. And also, my understanding is that the foot issue was legit. And so from there, why risk it? Why come out and potentially re-injure that and have it get any worse? So at that point, he shut it down, stayed around for a while, and then, later in the season, made his way back to the States.
Okay, and unfortunately, I got to follow up on the horse. We've been doing way too much talking about horses on No Dunks, but yeah, he named a horse LaMelo, and you're telling me he's racing.
It's about to run.
Okay, wow.
It's about to run.
Depending when we drop this, he LaMelo the horse. LaMelo, all caps, has either just run a race or recently run a race. So yeah, tell us about LaMelo the horse, not the basketball player.
Well, we don't have any form to go on just yet, but I did tap into my colleague Cam Luke, who's on NBL Overtime with me, who is a horse racing fiend and very good with the form. Great tips. Anyone wants to tap into Cam Luke. And I said, well, what's the go? I mean, should we put it? He says, not a strong field. So there's a chance. He said, there's a chance I wouldn't finish last in this race with the talent that's going to be on display on the track. So, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Might be worth a $5.
Better go each way. It's probably the best, though, Liam.
This was great to break down LaMelo Ball, not the horse, the basketball player. And a big thanks to one of our fans, Aaron Treble, who suggested that we reach out to you to have this conversation. And I just want to get one last question for you, because we're all sort of living in this LaMelo Ball mystery world. We all have our own opinions of him. How did fans, in your opinion, take to LaMelo Ball in Australia? Did they enjoy his stay there?
Loved him. I mean, obviously the hardcore fans were picking on the weaknesses in his game, right? And everyone wants to analyze what are his strengths and weaknesses. But the real fan, the genuine fans that fill the arenas, I mean, he filled the stands everywhere he went. Strangely enough, not at home, not in Illawarra. They didn't come out game in, game out, but he Sydney and Perth and Brisbane and Melbourne, I mean, they were all sold out games whenever he got there. Everyone, he's obviously a high profile kid with a massive social media following and a lovely kid, to be honest. I mean, when you talk to him, he's not, a prima donna. I was talking to someone the other day about, and he was saying, one of the things he thinks is a positive about LaMelo as a prospect is, there's always that question mark about teenagers coming into the NBA. They can, instant celebrity status, massive, they're about to become a millionaire. How are they going to handle that thing? And he said, this kid's been famous so long, he's already sick of it.
Right.
That sort of thing is not an issue with him. He's very kind of down to earth in your interactions with him. The fans loved him, and they filled the stands everywhere he went. And they'll have great memories of his time here in the league.
So it sounds like, though, you sort of established a bit of a relationship there with him too, just being around him and covering him. And so did you become, did you get to know him a little bit more than just the basketball player?
He took my money, Lee. He took my money. He came on our show right before those Australia-US games at Marvel Stadium that you and I sat together and
Yes.
watched in the building. And I was confident that we were going to give them a run for their money. And so I kind of was out there. So I think, I think we're going to be competitive. And he and RJ and everyone else on the panel were laughing at me. And I think we had a bet about maybe 7 points or 10 points, a bit of a line that we'd get in. We missed it by 1 point.
Right.
In that first game. We obviously won the second game, but the bet was for the first game. I put $20 on the line. Next time I saw him a few weeks later, he chased me down and wanted his payday. I said, mate, you're about to become a multi-millionaire. You're already a multi-millionaire. He said, give me my money. He had a bit of a laugh and, like those kind of interactions and you speak to his teammates. Dan Greeter, I interviewed him recently, one of his younger teammates. He said, mate, he's just a great kid. I mean, we hung out. I obviously knew about the celebrity and the reality TV show and all those kind of elements of him. But when he arrived, he said, I saw him on the floor at the training session and I knew he was the real deal. And then hanging out playing video games, I knew that he was a kind of a down-to-earth guy that we could get along with. So that were all positive things.
Hopefully then when he does get drafted, just before, you can scoop Adrian Wojnarowski and you can maybe get the inside lane as to where he's going. I don't know. So, I mean, I think there's a chance there for you to, get a big story out there. Isn't there? Like get the Woj bomb, get the Santa bomb.
I actually think my man Corey Homicide Williams has that
oh, yeah?
Yeah, he's got the line in at Jermaine, so you might want to put him on notification.
Yeah, I will. I'll send him a message and see if we can tee something up. But hey, listen, Liam, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, hearing about LaMelo. So thanks very much for your time, and look forward to seeing how it all turns out for him. I mean, you said Jason Kidd, Magic Johnson, so that's where his career's going to be.
Awesome, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks very much to Liam for joining us, and thank you to everyone out there listening. See you next time.